He grabbed my arm and dragged me from the taxi like I was garbage just because I asked him to stop near the ramp. My crutches clattered to the pavement. My body slammed into the curb. People watched. No one helped. And behind the wheel was a man who didn't see me as human, just a problem to discard. But what he didn't know was that moment humiliating, violent, unforgivable would spark something unstoppable. I was done being invisible, and when I stood up, the nation stood with me. Story details as follows. He yanked the door open and yelled, "You're wasting my time, lady. Get out." Before I could reach for my crutches, he lunged forward, grabbed my arm, and dragged me from the back seat of the taxi onto the cold concrete curb like I was a bag of garbage. My right leg twisted unnaturally beneath me. My elbow slammed against the doorframe. My handbag spilled open coins, pill bottles, my worn-out notebook, everything rolling across the sidewalk like my dignity shattered and exposed. And all this because I asked him to stop closer to the ramp. Behind him stood the building's security guard arms, crossed mouth curled into an arrogant smirk. His badge gleamed in the sun like a stamp of approval. He didn't move, didn't say a word, just watched. People walked by. Some slowed down. No one helped. One woman pulled out her phone not to call for aid, but to record. I heard her whisper, "This is gonna blow up." I was too stunned to cry. My body screamed, but my voice stayed locked in my throat. The driver tossed my crutches onto the pavement beside me like broken umbrellas, slammed the door, and drove off. I lay there, on the filthy sidewalk, half crushed under the weight of shame, and all I could think was, this can't be real. This can't be happening. Not again. I'm Jasmine Turner, 46. Mother, former school counselor. Disabled. Black. I live in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago alone with my cat Rumi and the ticking of a kitchen clock that runs 2 minutes fast. Ever since the accident that left me walking with metal rods in my leg, I've kept to myself. Peace became my sanctuary. I don't ask for much, just space to move, respect for my boundaries, and the dignity to live without being treated like a burden. I take taxis because the city buses are nightmares in motion. Drivers rarely wait long enough. People stare. One even told me I was slowing down the system. But this driver, he did more than stare. He took something from me that day. And I didn't know how to get it back. I managed to crawl to the base of the building, blood smearing on my knee through my pants. The receptionist behind the glass didn't come out. She just looked at me with this mild disapproval like I'd disrupted the decor. That building housed the Social Access Services office. I was there to submit paperwork documents that prove again that I need help to survive in a system built without me in mind. I was assaulted, I said, when I finally made it inside. No one flinched. Later, when I reported it to the cab company, a woman on the phone said, "Oh, we'll look into it," then offered me a voucher. A voucher. As if that could erase what happened. But I wasn't after an apology. I wanted accountability. That night I couldn't sleep. My knee throbbed. My pride hurt more. I sat on the floor replaying every second in my mind. His tone, the grip on my arm, the slam of the car door, the people who watched. I scrolled through my messages until I found one name, Marcy Thomas. She used to be my student. Now she's a civil rights lawyer. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but something told me, call her. And I did. What she said changed everything. Jazz, this isn't just about you. It's about all the women like you who don't get seen until they're in the morgue. I'll help you, but you've got to be ready to fight." And for the first time in years, I said yes, not just for me, but for every disabled woman who's ever been left in the dirt. The next morning, sunlight bled through the blinds, but it felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. My bruises had bloomed into dark purples like memories etched onto my skin. The throbbing pain in my leg was relentless, but deeper than that, there was something sharper resolve. Marcy showed up at my apartment at 8:02 a.m., a black folder tucked under one arm and fire in her eyes. She hadn't changed much since I taught her in high school. Same sharp cheekbones, same relentless energy that once got her suspended for leading a protest about cafeteria food. But now that fire had purpose. It had law degrees and courtroom experience behind it. She hugged me gently, careful not to press on my bruises. "Jazz, we're going to do this smart and loud." I didn't even have to ask what she meant. She pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the table. "I need your full account. No detail is too small. The more vivid, the more undeniable." So I told her. I told her about the cab, the driver's voice, the smirk of the guard, the silence of the crowd. My words cracked, but I didn't stop. Not this time. And then she said something that shifted the earth under me. "Jazz, that woman who filmed it. That video's online. It's already got 60,000 views." My heart stopped. "You're kidding." She turned her phone toward me. There I was, on the ground, flinching, reaching for my crutches. The driver speeding off. The caption read, "Disabled woman dragged by taxi driver." WTF Chicago. My humiliation had gone viral, but so had the truth. And in the comments section, something even more surprising, people cared. Some were outraged. Others shared similar stories, elderly parents thrown out of ride shares. Blind passengers refused service. Suddenly, it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. Marcy scrolled and said, "We can use this, but we need to move fast." That afternoon, we went to a nearby coffee shop, one of the few places with accessible entrances and tolerant staff. She laid out the plan like a general before battle. First, we file a formal civil complaint against the cab company and the driver. We name names. We demand public accountability. Second, we call a press conference. I've got contacts at the Tribune, Sun-Times, and a blogger who covers disability rights. You tell your story. I hesitated. What if it backfires? What if they twist it? She met my eyes. "Jazz, you are the twist. You're not some faceless victim. You're a fighter who lived it. We don't let them write the story. You do." Her confidence terrified me and empowered me. So I nodded. Let's do it. By Friday, the story had reached national outlets. NBC, BuzzFeed. Even a segment on a late-night show where a comedian sarcastically asked, "Is drag a disabled woman now a service add-on in Chicago taxis?" But with the laughter came light. Emails flooded in, offers to help. Witnesses came forward. One man had seen the driver do something similar to a blind passenger the month before. We weren't alone. And then came the first crack in the other side's wall. A spokesperson for the taxi company released a limp statement. "We are investigating the matter. The driver has been temporarily suspended. We apologize for any inconvenience." Inconvenience, that word lit a match in my chest. I took Marcy's advice. We filmed a video. Raw. No makeup, no theatrics. Just me. In my living room. My name is Jasmine Turner. I'm a mother, a daughter, a black woman living with disability. I was dragged from a taxi like my life didn't matter. But I do matter. And so do the thousands of others like me. We're done being silent. The video hit 1 million views in 24 hours. But not everyone was on my side. The trolls came. They always do. She's just doing this for attention. Probably faking the disability. If she can get into a taxi, she can get out of one. I read every comment. Some made me cry. Others made me shake. But none of them made me back down. Because what they didn't understand was this wasn't about attention. This was about dignity. And dignity doesn't ask for permission. The real shift came a week later. A woman named Yvette reached out. Elderly. Black. She'd been denied rides dozens of times because she used a walker. No one listened. Until she saw my video. I thought I was invisible, she said through tears. You made me feel seen. Then a veteran with PTSD. A deaf teenager. A mother with a disabled son. The stories kept coming. What started as my pain had become our movement, and the pressure mounted. The cab company tried to bury it all under bureaucracy. Claimed the driver was independent, not an employee. That I may have miscommunicated. Marcy responded with legal fire. Your driver assaulted a disabled woman. Your system enabled it. We're coming for both. The media asked for interviews. Activists called for boycotts. A protest was scheduled for City Hall. Thousands RSVP'd. And then we got the call. The driver had filed a counterclaim. He says you attacked him. Marcy said her jaw clenched. I laughed, a hollow, stunned laugh. Me, I can barely climb stairs. Exactly. They're grasping at shadows. But we'll crush it with the footage. Still, it rattled me. I wasn't used to being in the storm. But maybe. I was the storm now. That night, I sat alone on my balcony city lights, flickering below. I thought of every time I'd stayed quiet. Every time I'd swallowed the pain. Every time I thought it wasn't worth the fight. And I made a promise to myself. Never again. I could hear the chanting before I saw the crowd. Justice for Jasmine. Justice for all. It echoed through the streets like thunder on a dry plain. Thousands had gathered in front of Chicago's City Hall, young and old, disabled and able-bodied, black, white, brown. Some held signs with my name. Others held photos of loved ones who'd suffered similar injustices. And right at the front stood a woman in a wheelchair, tears streaming down her cheeks as she chanted louder than anyone around her. I stood behind the heavy oak doors of the municipal building, watching from a narrow pane of glass, my stomach twisting in disbelief. This had started with me with a single moment of humiliation, a single scream stifled on a cracked sidewalk. Now it was a movement. Beside me, Marcy placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. They're here for you. But more than that, they're here for what you represent. I swallowed the lump in my throat. What if I mess this up? She smiled, proud and steady. Then we fight again tomorrow. Minutes later, I stood at the podium. I wasn't wearing a suit. No stylist had done my hair. My leg ached from the brace and my voice trembled at first, but none of that mattered. Because when I opened my mouth, the city went quiet. I was dragged from a taxi like I was trash. And for a moment, I believed them. I believed I was trash, worthless, invisible, broken. But I'm here to tell you something. I am not broken. I am not invisible. And I'm not fighting for an apology. I'm fighting so this doesn't happen to the next Jasmine Turner. Or the next. A wave of cheers roared back at me. Flashbulbs flickered. Reporters scribbled. But all I saw were the faces strangers nodding with fierce recognition. This city says it supports accessibility, but policies mean nothing when people like me are still being thrown away physically and metaphorically. I paused. My eyes scanned the front row where Yvette, the elderly woman who'd reached out to me, clutched her walker, nodding with silent tears. I took a breath. If the system can't protect us, then we become the system. Right here, right now. This movement is bigger than me, bigger than one taxi driver. This is about justice for all of us. And then the crowd exploded. After the speech, we met with members of the city's transportation board. Marcy laid out every complaint, every story, every video clip. One by one. At first, they were defensive. Bureaucrats always are. We have standards in place. This is an isolated incident. The driver was not technically our employee. That's when Marcy turned on the screen and played the footage. Not just my footage. Dozens of videos. Elderly folks being left at curbs. Passengers with service dogs refused entry. Disabled teens mocked. Each one undeniable. Each one a stain on the system. And then she dropped the twist. 3 years ago, the city passed a law mandating sensitivity training for all commercial drivers. Not a single company implemented it. We have the receipts. Silence. No one spoke for a full minute. One of the board members looked physically ill. Another cleared his throat. What do you want? Marcy didn't hesitate. Accountability, reform, real enforcement, and a public apology live. On record, from the mayor himself. I expected resistance. Instead, he nodded. Give us 48 hours. We left the building into a sea of applause. Protesters lined the steps. Some hugged me, some took selfies, but most just said, "Thank you." That night it made national headlines. Chicago Woman's Courage sparks accessibility reform talks. Disabled black woman dragged from cab. Now she's dragging the system. The cab company cornered released a new statement. A real one this time. We are terminating our contract with the driver in question. Effective immediately. We will implement citywide training programs in collaboration with disability rights groups. We apologize unreservedly to Ms. Turner. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The next morning, the driver's name was finally revealed, David Kessler. And with that came the second twist. David had a history. 2 prior complaints for abusive behavior toward passengers, both dismissed as hearsay. A leaked internal email revealed he'd once called a passenger a lazy cripple. The cab company knew. They knew and kept him on the road. The fire reignited. More protests. More calls for justice. More investigations launched not just into the company, but into the city's failure to enforce its own laws. And amid all that chaos, something beautiful began to grow. People connected. A coalition formed survivors of transport abuse, disability. Advocates, veterans, students. They called themselves the Seen and Heard Project. Their mission, make invisible voices impossible to ignore. I became their face. But I wasn't alone. One night I returned home to find a letter taped to my door. It was handwritten in careful script. Dear Jasmine, I was in the crowd today. You probably didn't see me. I'm 15. I use a wheelchair. Kids laugh at me. Adults pretend not to. But today I felt powerful. Because of you. Thank you. I sat on the couch and wept, not from pain, but from the realization that something had shifted. Really shifted. No longer just me versus the world. Now the world was listening. I thought the worst was over. I thought once people saw the truth, they would stand with us, stay with us. But the backlash came like a tidal wave, unseen, silent at first, then crashing. It started with my phone ringing at 2 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. Then again at 3:10. By 6 a.m., my inbox had over 100 new emails. Not from supporters, from haters. From men who called me a liar, a race baiter. From women who accused me of milking the system. From anonymous senders who told me to watch my back and stay off the streets. One message chilled me more than the rest. You made him lose his job. You'll be next. I sat there, frozen, the morning sun spilling across my kitchen like nothing had changed. But everything had. I wasn't just a woman who'd been dragged from a taxi anymore. I was a symbol. And symbols scare people. Later that day, Marcy came over. She didn't even say hello. She just opened her laptop and launched into it. There, digging into your past. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? Old school records, credit history, medical claims, anything they can twist to discredit you. I stared at her. How is that legal? It's not. But legality isn't the weapon. Doubt is. I didn't have anything to hide, but I did have things I didn't want on display. My 2016 bankruptcy, the painkiller dependency after my surgery, my missed therapy appointments when depression swallowed me whole. But I'd survived all of it. Still, I knew how fast the world could turn a survivor into a villain. They're going to try to make you look unstable, dishonest, Marcy said quietly. But we're ready. I nodded slowly, heart pounding. Then let them come. The next 72 hours were brutal. A viral blog post accused me of exaggerating my injuries. She seemed to move fine in that rally footage, it said, quoting a former coworker I barely remembered. A right-wing commentator released a video, the real Jasmine Turner victim, or opportunist. He played clips of me out of context, laughing at the rally hugging people, and compared it to the footage of me being dragged. They don't match, he sneered. I didn't cry. Not yet. I refused to give them that. But inside I was breaking. The worst came when a news anchor asked me, "Live, Ms. Turner. Is it possible this entire thing is being blown out of proportion?" I looked right into the camera and said, "No, what's been blown out of proportion is people's tolerance for cruelty." The clip went viral. Again. But this time, not just among supporters. The mayor called me that evening. "Ms. Turner, we'd like to invite you to speak before the city council." Marcy leaned in to whisper, "Don't do it unless they let you speak uncensored." So I asked, and they agreed. And then, the unexpected happened. 3 days before the council hearing, someone rang my doorbell. I opened it, and there he stood, David Kessler, the man who dragged me from his cab. His beard was unkempt. His jacket hung off his shoulders. He looked smaller than I remembered, and more human than I wanted. "Why are you here?" I asked, not stepping aside. "I need to say something, face to face." I didn't know what possessed me to let him in. Maybe I wanted to hear what pathetic excuse he'd offer. Maybe I wanted to see if remorse had a face. He sat stiffly on the edge of my couch. I stayed standing. I was angry, he said. That day, I was behind on bills, fighting with my ex. I'd had 3 rude passengers, and I snapped. "I took it out on you." I stared at him silent. He looked up at me. I was wrong. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was more than I expected. "Do you think saying that erases what you did?" I asked. "No." "Do you think it makes the video disappear?" The pain. The humiliation. "No," he said again. "But maybe. It helps me live with it." And I realized he wasn't here for me. He was here for himself. I opened the door. Then go live with it. He left without another word. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about justice, about what it means, about who gets to ask for it and who has to earn it. Marcy called. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I will be. I've got news." I sat up straighter. The city council hearing. They've confirmed it. Live broadcast, unfiltered. You'll be the last speaker. They want you to close it out. My breath caught. "This is it, Jazz," she said. "You ready?" I stared out the window at the city that had both broken and built me. "I'm beyond ready." 2 nights later, I stood in front of the city council. A microphone in front of me. Cameras pointed from every angle. I took a deep breath, and I began. When I was dragged from that taxi, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I couldn't. But today, I can. So I will. I told them everything. Not just the attack, but the silence that followed, the systems that failed me, the public shaming, the threat, the burden of proof placed on me. I am disabled, I am black, I am a woman, and I am done apologizing for existing. The room was silent. Council members leaned forward. The mayor looked down. And to those watching from home who've been told to stay quiet, stay small. I say this, we don't owe them our silence. We owe ourselves the fight. I stepped back, and the room erupted. Applause thundered. People rose from their seats. Reporters jostled for reaction. But I didn't stay. I walked out, into the air, into the light, where my story was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of us. I never expected it to reach the Capitol. The day after the city council hearing, I was sitting on my worn couch, petting Rumi, my gray tabby, who always knew when I needed her most when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Ms. Turner. This is Representative Clara Mendoza from D.C. I saw your speech. So did the Committee on Civil Rights." I blinked, stunned. She continued. "We'd like you to testify before the House. In 2 weeks." I didn't speak, couldn't. "Are you willing?" she asked. I took a breath that felt like it reached into my spine. Yes. The following days moved like a storm, relentless, blinding. News crews camped outside my building. I had to exit through the back alley just to pick up groceries. Online, my name trended beside hashtags like Disability Justice and Jasmine Turner Testifies. Marcy sat with me every morning preparing my statement for Congress. "We'll keep it clean," she said, "but powerful, no sugarcoating." "What if they twist it?" I asked. She looked me dead in the eyes. Then we twisted back. Meanwhile, more and more people were stepping forward. Stories poured into my inbox: disabled veterans, blind school teachers, single mothers in wheelchairs, all sharing how they'd been rejected, ignored, mistreated. I wasn't a lone spark anymore. I was part of a wildfire. 2 days before I left for D.C., I received a handwritten letter. The return address said Illinois Department of Human Services. I opened it cautiously. Inside a note from a woman named Sharon, an employee who'd been working the desk the day I was dragged from the taxi. I watched it happen. I didn't help. I was scared. But that's not an excuse. "I'm sorry, Jasmine. I'm so sorry. You inspired me to resign and apply to work in disability advocacy. I hope one day I can say I did the right thing. You already have." I held the letter to my chest and cried, not because I was sad, but because somewhere in all the noise, someone else had found their voice. When I arrived in Washington, I wore a navy blue dress. Simple. My mother's pearl earrings, and my crutches not as a sign of weakness, but as a banner of survival. The Capitol building loomed before me white and unforgiving, a place that had ignored women like me for generations. But not today. Inside, cameras were already rolling. Representatives lined the chamber. News outlets reported every minute. I could see a few recognizable faces: activists, law students, even a vet flown in by a nonprofit. And then, it was my turn. I stood at the podium, adjusted the mic. My name is Jasmine Turner. I am a citizen of this country. And I'm here to say the system that promises liberty and justice for all has failed the disabled. I took my time. I let the silence breathe. On March 12th, I was violently dragged from a taxi by a driver who saw my body not as something deserving of dignity, but as an inconvenience. He left me injured on the curb. And that Representatives is the story of how America often treats the disabled. I read testimonies sent by others. I named the ones who never got justice. I spoke about the gaps in law loopholes that allow private transport companies to skirt responsibility. And then I delivered the line Marcy had helped me craft, what would later be quoted across every major news site. Disability is not a flaw. It is not a malfunction to be discarded. It is a reality, a human one. And every system that refuses to adapt to that reality is broken. I finished. The chamber was quiet. Then, one by one, lawmakers rose to their feet. Later that day, Representative Mendoza pulled me aside. "We're drafting the Turner Accessibility Act," she said. "It'll mandate anti-discrimination training for all federally funded transportation services and create an independent watchdog agency." I stared at her stunned. "You're naming it after me," she smiled. "You earned it." That night, back at the hotel, I stared at the city from the window. Rumi's picture sat beside my suitcase. My leg throbbed from exhaustion. My inbox was full. My name was everywhere. But all I could think about was my former self, the woman on the sidewalk reaching for her crutches as people walked past. She would never have believed this. And yet, she's the reason I made it here. Because even then, even bruised and humiliated, she didn't give up. The following week I returned to Chicago, but it wasn't the same city anymore. Murals had gone up one of me, painted on the side of a community center. "We rise when we refuse to fall." The mayor's office announced a new local law fines for discrimination against disabled passengers, mandatory disability training for all city drivers, and monthly community town halls. But the most emotional moment came during a community event hosted by the Seen and Heard Project. A young girl no older than 10 approached me in a pink wheelchair. Her voice was soft. "My name is Brielle. I want to be like you when I grow up." I knelt beside her holding her small hands. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Be better than me." She smiled. And in that moment I knew we weren't just changing laws. We were changing futures. The storm I had walked into was no longer mine alone. It had grown, spread, awakened something in the bones of this country. Something raw. Something righteous. But I knew there was still one wall standing. The cab company. They had hidden behind contracts lawyers and statements crafted by PR firms. Their CEO, Randall Keener, had yet to speak publicly. Not once. Not even as the Turner Accessibility Act gained bipartisan traction in Congress. Not even when protesters gathered weekly in front of his company's headquarters chanting, "Accountability, not apologies." But all that changed when an insider blew the whistle. Marcy met me at my door at 6 a.m., her eyes blazing. "They've been hiding driver complaints for years," she said, pacing my living room. What I asked, heart-skipping. A former HR manager leaked hundreds of emails. They show systematic suppression of abuse reports, many involving disabled and elderly passengers. Most of them were dismissed. Some were never even documented. She dropped a thick folder on my kitchen table. I opened it. Page after page. Name after name. I want this in front of a judge, I said. And I want him, Keener, in that courtroom. She nodded. We'll file tomorrow. Within hours it hit the news. Leaked documents reveal systemic abuse in Goldline Cab Company. Turner case expands. DOJ to investigate civil rights violations. CEO Randall Keener subpoenaed faces class action lawsuit. The protests swelled. What began as signs and chants became sit-ins, nightly vigils, wheelchair processions that blocked intersections. But more powerful than the crowds was the testimony. Survivors stepped forward. Not for attention, but for truth. A blind grandmother who was left 10 miles from her destination. A paraplegic man who had been forced to crawl out of a cab when the driver refused to lift his chair. A young autistic teen mocked by a driver for faking it. They shared their pain, and the world listened. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Reporters jostled for camera angles. Supporters filled every seat. And, front and center, sat Keener, gray-haired stiff in a $1,000 suit, flanked by lawyers who whispered like vultures. He looked at me once, and looked away. Marcy opened with fire. For years, this man built profit on the backs of silence. But the silence ends now. She displayed the emails, the patterns, the deleted complaints. Keener's lawyers countered with denial red tape technicalities. But then the whistleblower took the stand. It was a woman, early 50s, nervous. I was told to ignore complaints from non-standard passengers, she said. That's what they called people with disabilities. They said it wasn't worth the bad PR to make it a thing. There was a collective gasp in the room. Even the judge leaned forward. And did Mr. Keener approve this language? Marcy asked. Yes, the woman whispered. He said, if we gave a damn about every broken body in this city, we'd go bankrupt. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed to file. The judge banged his gavel. And I just sat there, frozen, because in that moment justice wasn't abstract. It was real. It had a face. And it was cracking. The final blow came the next morning. Keener resigned. Not with grace, not with a live apology. No, just a printed statement slipped to the press. But it didn't matter. The man who once believed he was untouchable had been brought down by the voices he thought didn't count. And in his place rose a new board, one built with advocate survivors, legal experts, and people like Yvette, who had once been forgotten. We didn't just tear down a wall. We rebuilt it. That evening, I returned to the site where it all began. The curb, the cold slab of concrete where I had once lay humiliated, discarded. Now it had been transformed. A mural covered the wall behind it, painted by a local artist. It showed a woman standing tall with crutches surrounded by outstretched hands. Above her, in bold gold letters, not invisible, not weak, not alone. I stood there, tears streaming freely as strangers walked past and smiled. One man touched my shoulder gently. Thank you, he whispered. At a press event the following week, Mayor Sheffield, once criticized for her silence, stood at a podium beside me. Chicago must not be remembered for how Jasmine Turner was treated that day, she said, but for how we responded. Let her courage be the turning point. And in front of the entire city, she unveiled the new initiative, Jasmine's Law, a city ordinance enforcing immediate suspension of any driver accused of abuse or discrimination toward disabled passengers pending investigation. It also provided grants for accessible transport and protections for whistleblowers. People cheered. I didn't. I exhaled, because this fight had cost me so much: my peace, my privacy, my fear. But what it gave back was bigger than me. Later that night, I met with Brielle and her mother again, the little girl in the pink wheelchair who once told me she wanted to be like me. She held up a hand-drawn picture of us, both standing on a stage capes billowing behind us. "I made you a superhero," she said proudly. I knelt, my voice cracking. "No, Brielle, you made me one." Spring came early that year. The sidewalks no longer felt like battlegrounds. The air was softer, lighter, like something had shifted beneath the city's ribs. Maybe it was the new law. Maybe it was the art, the vigils, the kids in wheelchairs rolling through parks like royalty. Or maybe the fight had finally borne fruit. But in truth, it wasn't over. It never really is. I sat at my kitchen table tea, steeping in a chipped blue mug, watching the morning sun turn my living room gold. Rumi purred quietly in the windowsill. On the table sat a stack of letters, dozens from people I'd never met. One said, "Because of you, I applied for disability accommodations at school for the first time." Another, "My mom was assaulted in a rideshare 3 years ago. We thought no one would care. But you made the world care." And one more, "I'm not ashamed of my cane anymore." These weren't fan letters, they were testimonies. Proof that pain, when spoken aloud, becomes purpose. I was invited to speak at the University of Chicago. A lecture hall filled with students, activists, professors. Some of them had watched the video that started it all. Most knew me only by headlines, but all of them listened. I stood at the podium, breath steady. We live in a world where silence is often rewarded, where those who endure quietly are called brave, and those who speak up are called difficult. But let me tell you something. Being difficult saved my life. There were no cameras that day, no viral clips, no trending hashtags, just people, hearts, minds, and maybe that mattered more. Weeks later, Marcy and I sat on the roof of her apartment building, watching the city shimmer at dusk. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" she asked gently. I sipped my tea before answering. Every day. She looked down, but I added, I wouldn't change what came after. I wouldn't trade the movement, the people we met, the lives we touched. I wouldn't trade becoming someone I can finally be proud of. Marcy smiled. "You know what that means." "What?" "It means you won." One afternoon I got a call from a transportation board in New York City. They were adopting a version of Jasmine's Law. Then Seattle. Then Atlanta. The ripple kept spreading. Soon, universities began requiring accessibility training for incoming students. Major ride-share companies announced sweeping policy overhauls. A national conversation, once a whisper, was now a chorus. And then came the final twist. David Kessler, the man who dragged me, sent a letter. Typed, formal, but human. I joined a program for men who committed acts of public aggression. Part of it required me to face what I did. Your strength forced me to confront my cowardice. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know I've changed. I read it once, then again, and I set it down not out of hate, not out of pride, but because I didn't need it to move forward. His redemption wasn't my burden. My freedom had already been claimed. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, the Seen and Heard Project hosted a citywide festival for accessibility. Food trucks, music, art booths designed by disabled artists. Laughter rang through the air like church bells. Brielle danced in her wheelchair, spinning to the rhythm of a gospel choir. Yvette told her story to a group of high schoolers who listened like she was royalty. And I stood on stage, mic in hand, no notes, no script, just truth. This movement isn't about me. It's about us. It's about what happens when one person refuses to stay down and 1,000 others rise with her. It's about making a world where no one is dragged from a car or a classroom or a conversation just because they don't fit someone's idea of convenience. The crowd roared. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long, long time I felt peace. At home I hung a new frame on my wall. Inside it, a simple piece of paper. A printout of that viral video paused at the moment I fell. Below it I had written, "This is where they thought it would end. This is where I began." In a world that often overlooks the quiet suffering of the vulnerable, this story reminds us of one truth. Dignity is not granted, it is claimed. Jasmine Turner's journey from humiliation to heroism proves that even the most painful moments can become the spark for change. Her courage did more than hold a man accountable, it cracked open a system and gave voice to the voiceless, the meaning of life. It's not in what happens to us, but in what we choose to do with it. Pain is real, but so is power. And when we rise for each other, we rise for ourselves. If this story moved, you don't just scroll past. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real-life stories that expose injustice and celebrate human resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. And hit the bell icon so you never miss the truth. Speak up, stand tall, stay human.